I want you to be honest. I always want you to be honest, but we're really, really honest when we're working and connecting with God, right? How many of you have ever read a passage in the Bible you didn't like? I was gonna, like only a third of you. We should talk about that. There's not a lot of Bible reading going on, or you all are a little easier to get along with than I am. But I'm going to tell you, there's stuff that I read in the scriptures that sometimes just makes me shake my head. And then there's sometimes stuff that I read in the scriptures that makes me want to shake my fist. Say, God, I don't like that. I don't like what you're saying. I don't like what you're doing. And it's usually because it hits us in a way that we just don't like. The scripture connects and does something to us, and maybe it just kind of grates on that nerve, but it rubs us the wrong way. Whatever it is, it drives us a little crazy. And this passage today, what began to jump out at me is that there have been times in my life that because of whatever was going on inside of me, I missed out on some really good things. Have you guys ever missed out on good things because you just were not in a good spot? Maybe you were being really grumpy. Maybe you were just having a bad day. Maybe you say it all the time. You rolled out or got out of bed on the wrong side. Whatever it might be. And I say that stuff to the kids. They'll wake up grumpy. I think there was something inside of us that it is just easy to do this stuff. And if you can't remember a time that you have been grumpy or that you have had a harsh approach to life, ask a loved one. Ask a spouse. Ask a parent, ask a child, ask a best friend. They will tell you. Ask a coworker. They will let you know that you've had some moments like this. And they can be moments that are really fun. They can be moments that we just missed out on connecting with someone because we just got stuck on us. I just got focused on the problems that we were having. And Pastor Greg, I appreciated you sharing about having needles done. Having that IV done. I do not like needles at all. I don't like blood and guts, let's be honest. And just a little flashback to last week with the fish fry. I appreciated everyone who came out and helped, and special thank you. But some of you got to see something about me that I don't always publicize. The fact that I don't like to touch fish. And at one point, I think it was Dan that said, Jamey, just touch it. Now, it is easy to let those kinds of things that we're a little embarrassed about or things that we don't always want people to know to keep us from connecting with other people in a lot of different ways. And I share my stuff, not because I want you to hand me live fish. I share my stuff because I want you to be honest about your stuff. I want you to think about what's going on with you. Because if we come in with a mentality that everyone is perfect but me, then we will never be honest about who we are and what we're really dealing with. And Pastor Greg and I were talking just in the greeting time, saying, man, this is French Creek. People that all have hurts, but aren't pretentious about it. They don't pretend that they haven't had hurts. Every one of us in this building has had major hurts at one point in our life, or maybe we're going through it right now. And what I love is that we don't have to come in and say, I am wonderful, it's the best day of my life. Sometimes it's not. On the other hand, we are not all Eeyores. And every day isn't the worst day of our life either, right? If you weren't quite sure of that reference, I did go see Christopher Robin with the kiddos. I was quite excited. It was one of the first movies we got to sit all the way through. Well, technically, the Jen got to sit all the way through. You know, because usually when the kids are scared, it's Jen taking them out. They want to go with mommy because they're scared. And so, getting to see Eeyore and his constant problems of life reminded me, man, it's easy to be Eeyore, but it's also easy to pretend that we never have a problem. Somewhere in the middle is the majority of life. Somewhere in the middle is a much healthier spot to be. And it is so easy to miss what we were trying to focus on because we just get stuck with us. We just get stuck on what we think should happen or the conversation that we think should be happening. In kind of preparing for this, I was going back through some of the conversations that I have with Jen, and there's a common conversation that we've had a number of times. And basically it ends with, do you remember we talked about it? Now, leading up to that, I have no idea what the conversation is. But that's the line that I remember. Do you remember we talked about it? The answer is usually no, I don't remember, or you wouldn't be asking. You have that problem too?
Yep.
So, it seems to be a guy problem at times. So guys, if you have this problem, this is a great chance to really pay attention to it and own that. But clearly I didn't remember the conversation because she had to ask me. And you would think that if that happened once, I would be good the next time. But that's not always how it works. And what I love about this is when we take this principle, this understanding that we don't always get it right the first time, man, we can see that in the disciples. We can see that as they follow Jesus and as they try and do what Jesus is teaching them. They don't always get it right the first time. They don't always get it right the second time. They don't always get it right the third time. And boy, I'll tell you what, it's not that I want to see the disciples mess up, but it sure does remind me that they were human too. And it is comforting when I feel like I keep messing up. And surely Jesus has to be frustrated with me. Our passage today is in the Gospel of Mark. It's chapter 10. And if you remember, we've been working through the Gospel of Mark throughout these lectionary readings. And we're going to go right into a passage that we often skip parts of this in chapter 10. But we're going to read the whole thing and then we're going to talk about it. Well, at least the first 16 verses of chapter 10. Jesus then left that place and went into the region of Judea and across the Jordan. Again, crowds of people came to him as was his custom. He taught them. Some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" "What did Moses command you?" he replied. They said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." Notice how easy it was for the man to just write that piece of paper and send the wife away. Really a male-dominated society when you think about that. Write a piece of paper, your wife is gone. He said, "Moses permitted that we could do that." Jesus responded, "It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law." Jesus replied, "But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female, and for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate." By the way, when I do that in weddings, it's let no one separate. Just to put that out there, let no one separate that. And when they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. And he answered, "Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery." And then little people were bringing little children to Jesus to have him touch them. Little people, I am so sorry. Greg, I'd have been okay if you wouldn't have laughed. I'd have recovered. And most people wouldn't have even caught it. Thank you. People of all sizes, we're bringing little children to Jesus so that Jesus might touch them. But the disciples rebuked them. And when Jesus saw them, he was indignant, and he said to them, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, put his hands on them, and blessed them. In this passage, Jesus is doing one of the things that he does so well. We tend to think so often as Jesus performing miracles. We tend to think of Jesus withdrawing to pray. But one of the primary functions that Jesus had, especially throughout the Gospel of Mark, is teaching. And Jesus is here teaching. And if you remember from the past couple of weeks, they are on their way to Jerusalem. And as they're on their way to the Jerusalem, he has shared the passion narrative with the disciples now twice, trying to help them understand what's about to happen to him. That he will be turned over, that he will be rejected, that ultimately he will be crucified. Everything that we think of when it comes to the time of Easter, that's what they're on their way to do. And Jesus is trying to help the disciples understand it. And as they're on this way, Jesus does something that truly reveals his character. How many of you tend to shut down when you're having something rough ahead of you? Something that you don't like? You know, if I was going in to have blood drawn, please don't talk to me about your problems. I will be fully wrapped up in my own problems. It is so easy to take that position. But Jesus, as he's on his way to Jerusalem with his disciples, isn't wrapped up in what he's about to experience. He is focusing on teaching and trying to help the disciples, the crowd, everyone who's coming around him to understand more and more about the kingdom of God. And so he's teaching, sharing, as he's voluntarily walking towards Jerusalem. As he is teaching and saying this stuff, he's really living out what he says and what he teaches. And so this stark contrast begins to emerge because we have Jesus who is about to give of himself voluntarily to cover the sins of the world, and then we have the Pharisees kind of emerge from the crowd. And the Pharisees begin to do what with Jesus? They begin to ask him questions, but what's their purpose? They want to trick him up. They want to cause problems. They want to test Jesus. They really want to see if they can get him to say something stupid. Something that they can use against him. Something that they can really integrate into their cause to get rid of Jesus, who is becoming this great problem for them. And so a stark contrast. Jesus, who gives of himself even as he's on his way to give of himself, and the Pharisees, who just want to cause continual problems. And so they try to trap Jesus as he's voluntarily on his way. And they aren't just asking this question. They aren't just asking about divorce, but they're really trying to pit Jesus, his position on divorce, against the position that Moses gave them. And then they have something that they can truly, truly use against him. You know what that tells us about the Pharisees in that moment? They weren't really interested in listening to Jesus. They were more concerned about their agenda. This is one of the places in this passage that begins to apply to us. And we don't like it. This is one of those things that is an ouch moment, because there are a number of times in our lives where not only do we not want to listen to other people and what they share, but we don't want to listen to God. How many times have you told God to be quiet? Or, let's take a different approach. How many times have you passively told God to be quiet just by refusing to pray? There are a number of times that we choose not to pray because we know what God is probably going to tell us and we don't like it. And if you've never had a moment of God sharing something with you that you didn't like, man, we got to talk. Because I want to know how that happens. Because I've certainly had moments of God sharing stuff with me that I didn't like. I've had moments that I anticipated God to say something that would just kind of set me free, and yet it didn't happen that way. And even moments of God not responding back quickly at all. They take us to this place where we really don't want to hear what God has to say. And I point this out because it's so easy to make the Pharisees horrible, awful people. But man, we can relate to them in this instance. Here they are, not wanting to hear what Jesus really has to say. They're just wanting to get something from Jesus for their own purpose. It tells us about the condition of their hearts. Their hearts were hardened. And because they were hardened, because they were so self-focused, they weren't able to hear anything that Jesus was trying to share with them. See, we take this passage and we jump right to what the subtitle was in my Bible, divorce. And we use this passage to try and do what even the early church did, and what the Pharisees were trying to do. Is divorce okay or not? We really want to kind of take the conversation and move it down to the lowest level possible. Jesus responds in a way that doesn't give the disciple or the Pharisees something to argue with him about. They do argue, but they can't really use it to prosecute him. But he responds in a way that makes them think. That drives me crazy. Over the years, I've had different mentors in my life and people that I have really respected and worked with. And I would ask them questions, and do you know what I wanted them to tell me? Yes or no. Go left, go right. Whatever it is, that's what I wanted them to say. And they would say stupid things like, well, what's God telling you to do? I say stupid, but it was really frustrating. They would say things that I didn't want to hear. Like, well, gee, Jamey, I can't tell you who you should marry. Or, gee, Jamey, I can't tell you which direction is going to be right for you. I can't tell you which direction that you have to go. But why not? Why can't you just do that for me? Over the years, I've returned the favor to other people. I can't do this for you. I can't make that decision for you. But we really like things to be easy. And when our hearts are hardened, we don't often want to really engage and to work with stuff. We just want to move on to the next thing, so that we can focus on what we are really interested in. And for the Pharisees, they weren't really interested in what Jesus was saying. They weren't really interested in hearing his teaching and following him and becoming disciples. Well, most of them at least, from what the scriptures show us. They were interested in keeping things good for them, in keeping their life working as smoothly as possible. I've shared with you before, none of us wake up in the morning and pray, "Dear God, let me have problems today." No. Dear God, help it to be a good day. Help things to go smoothly. Help them to find that van on the first try. Help them to finish the parking lot before Sunday. Help them to not make me touch a fish. Whatever it may be, those are the things that that come into focus in our lives. Make it easy for me. Don't make it hard. And there is this tension that we see in the scriptures here. And one of the things that we see in the Pharisees is this hardened heart and their self-focus. I don't think you can miss that correlation. When our hearts become hardened, we are absolutely focused on us. And when we focus on us, our hearts tend to harden. Because if I am more concerned about what I want, I'm going to become less concerned about what you want or what matters to you. And so as we look in this passage of divorce, this is all about me, me, me. The topic is, but also the interaction. When you were kids, how many of you had to sit at the little kids' table? What was your desire then? Sit at the big kids' table. That's right. Which actually takes us right into this next part. That we all desire to grow. We all want to grow up. We all want to be part of the bigger stuff. The stuff that goes on at the upper level. Deciding who is right. When I was a kid, there were a couple things that I wanted to decide. Number one, what toys I was going to get. I wanted to pick that stuff out. Number two, what time I was going to go to bed. And number three, what snacks I was going to get to eat and the quantity of those. Those were the things that I really wanted to be able to decide. And it was frustrating for me when people would decide those things for me. Anyone else been there? Oh yeah, absolutely, right? Yeah, when it comes down to that kind of stuff, we don't want someone else to just decide for us. We want to make those decisions because obviously I know what is best for me. And that idea of knowing what is best for me and not wanting someone else to speak into my life, to challenge me to do something better or healthier, it's another sign of a hardened heart. Because hardened hearts have no room for growth. They have no room for people to speak into them. They have no room for people to challenge what is going on there. None of us enjoy being challenged, per se, right? Some of the worst words that you can say in a relationship is, "You're wrong." Them's fighting words, right? And if you don't know that, try it out. And whether that's in a marriage relationship or a dating relationship or a friendship relationship, co-worker relationship, maybe employee to employer relationship, try telling your boss they're wrong. Even when they're wrong, it doesn't go well. By the way, our boss is never wrong, right? Even when we think God is wrong. But hardened hearts often don't have room for growth. And it's what we see in the Pharisees. And I think what gives us an inkling of where the disciples were is that their hearts weren't hardened because they continued to ask Jesus for clarification. Help us understand. Jesus, you had this interaction with the Pharisees about divorce, but we don't get it. Explain it to us again. And then we move into the passage of the disciples interacting with the children. And what do the disciples do with the kids? They push them away. Why? Go back to the kids' table for a minute. Why were the kids kicked out?
Because they were little and they didn't want to be interfered.
Because this is grown-up stuff. This is grown-up stuff. And we finally made it to the big table. Don't bring us down. The moments that I got to sneak to the adult table as a kid, there were these hushed conversations when I walked around. I bet some of you have experienced those hushed conversations. Maybe you were on the recipient end not knowing what was being said, or maybe you were actually having the conversation, trying to keep what you were saying quiet because as kids, man, there's no filter. You just share whatever you hear. I do often worry sometimes what our kids tell the teachers at school. What things are said. Every now and then I'll hear them repeat something and I'm like, that's not how we live. Well, I heard you say it. I don't think so. Oh, that's what I heard. There's these great moments of not wanting kids to hear everything that's going on. And so when we're in these moments where we want to have the grown-up conversations, we push the kids to the side. And the disciples are still trying to figure out everything that Jesus is sharing. They're trying to learn what they can. And for the disciples, people who are pushed down, who were on the bottom rungs of society, they are with Jesus. People are coming around. They're paying attention. People are listening to what the disciples say. It feels really good. And here come the kids. This is no place for kids. And yet Jesus' words are the exact opposite. Do you know how hard it was for the disciples to hear that from Jesus? He says, don't send the kids away. Bring the kids in. In fact, you would do well to learn from them. When's the last time someone told you that if you acted like your kid, you'd be in better shape? That's the heart of this passage. Jesus says to the disciples, if you would stop acting like yourself, hard-hearted, self-focused, thinking you have it all together, and be more like a child, you would do better in the kingdom of God. Boy, those are tough words. One of the ways that we can tell what our heart looks like is how we handle those words. If we turn and walk away and said, no way, Jesus, or if we can embrace that and say, you know what, maybe there's some truth in that, it gives us a real clue as to the condition of our heart. Because unfortunately, we don't get to pull our heart out and see if it's really hardened or if it's flexible, if it's malleable, if it can be moved and changed. But these kinds of things give us a really good scan of that, a really good image of what the condition of our heart is. By the way, this applies in marriage as well. So much of the part that they were talking about here is, I am frustrated with my wife. I am tired of my wife. Moses said I could write a certificate and send her away. This is a pretty uncomfortable passage, isn't it? How many of you would like to be sent away with just a piece of paper? No. And yet, because of the society and the way it worked, men could absolutely write a piece of paper and divorce their wife. She was done. She had really nothing that she owned. There was no divorce settlement. There was no thing going on here. And divorce was common at that point in time as it is now, right? And this is one of those passages that's kind of ouchy because there are a number of us in this congregation who have been divorced and also remarried. And so when we have an ouchy passage, we tend to do what we do with all ouchy things, and we avoid them. I know ouchy is not the most scholarly word you could use, but I think it kind of takes us right to the heart of it. We don't like things that hurt. We don't like things that cut us. We don't like things that shed light in areas of our life that maybe we're ashamed of, or that maybe that are filled with lots of hurt, or that maybe was a great struggle to get through. I forget exactly where I was going with that, sorry. But this passage on divorce, it's hard. And Jesus actually says in this, he doesn't say divorce isn't okay. He also doesn't say it's okay. He actually quotes back what Moses had done. He goes back and he challenges them to not just take the little bit that they were looking for, that answer of yes and no, and to do something different with it. We like easy answers. Jesus does not give them the easy answer. He actually doesn't give them the easy answer at all. They want to know, can we do it or not? Jesus doesn't say it's okay. He doesn't say it can't happen. But what Jesus does say is that a piece of paper can't erase all of the impacts of a marriage. For those of you who have been divorced, you know that your relationship with that person probably still has some places that cross over. If you shared children together, if you had any kind of financial activities together, if you now have maybe Christmases for grandkids or kids or birthday parties or all this stuff that we share, the life that we had together as one is not easily separated. And so he begins to talk about the fact that you can write a piece of paper because Moses said that, but it doesn't make everything go away. And it certainly can't just be undone. The ties created in marriage are not easily, if ever, completely untied. Does that make sense? Jesus doesn't say you can't do it. He doesn't say go do it. He says, but you need to understand when this happens, the bonds that were created can't easily be untied. Boy, that's not the easy answer. Because when couples come to me and they want to talk about divorce, do you want to know what their answer they're looking for? Can I do it? Is it okay? I can't give you permission. I also can't tell you no. And they say, but I want you to tell me yes. But it's not my place to say. Boy, this is a hard answer, isn't it? It's not easy. In fact, so often when we get serious about following Jesus, what we find is that there are a lot of answers that aren't easy. There are a lot of times that it's far harder to follow Jesus than it is to go our own way. I like what I think, and often I think I'm right. If you don't believe me, ask my wife. Ask Claudia. Ask those around me. Ask my kids. They'll tell you. But I bet if I were to ask your spouse, and your kids and your family and your coworkers, they'd say the same thing. We all like what we think. And if we're going to move past that, we have to be honest and say, you know what? My inclination is to have a hard heart. But Jesus says I have a heart that needs to have room for growth, which means it needs to become softer so that He can work on it and shape it and allow me to be changed, even if it's uncomfortable. The third part, and this is actually the title that we were working with today, and I think this is, if nothing else motivates you in this to think about whether or not your heart is hard or soft, I hope it's this: hardened hearts miss the greatest joys. I am absolutely convinced that when our heart is hardened, we are so self-focused that we miss the joys of life. We miss everything else around us that is good. We miss God being at work. We miss the joy of seeing kids do what kids do. We miss the joy of connecting with others. We miss the joy of celebrating. And believe it or not, we miss the joy of weeping with one another. Not that there is joy in weeping, but there is that good feeling of knowing that you've connected. Hardened hearts miss the world. And so I want you to think about this, because we want to take it to the lowest rung and say, tell me if this is okay. Man, that's not it. That's not what this passage is. This is allow your heart to be open, shaped by God, and it'll take you to some place that you never dreamed of. Both good, bad, scary, all of that stuff. And I want to close with the divorce aspect. We are not in a place to ever put anyone down because of what they have done. I want to be very, very adamant on that. And Pastor Greg talked about stopping the friendly fire. He was right on in that. We are never in a place to put someone else for what they have done. We're never in a place to put them down. Because we never know everything that goes on behind the scenes. We never know all of the details. We never know everything that happens. And frankly, I have worked with some couples with marriages that needed to end because they were toxic and flat out harmful. That's not something you normally hear preached, is it? But you all know it's true. But I think we need to be careful, and I think we need to be very discerning before we make major steps like this. Because just like we were talking, those ties can't easily be undone. And we'll continue to have to work with others around us. By the way, I have come to understand that we can't just divorce parts of the church either. I haven't been divorced. I pray that I never divorce. And that I think we enjoy being together. I certainly do. And I don't want that to happen. But as I left St. John's a number of years ago, it was not an easy spot for me.
Nor has either.
I was a young pastor. I thought I was right. It didn't go the way I thought it would go. And I thought the answer was to leave. Figured, if it was big enough, we won't run into each other. Man, did God laugh at that. And the relationships that we had weren't easily separated. Partly because some of you are my neighbors. Partly because for so many reasons. Relationships take work. And we can't just say, I'm tired of you, I'm done with you, I'm out of here. No, we're going to run into each other. And if we don't think we're going to run into each other again in this life, chances are we will in the life eternal. And I don't think there's supposed to be that stuff between believers. I really don't. So let's hear this message on divorce. And not just make it about a marriage ending, but make it about relationships. Let's hear this message on children, and not just make it on the kids that the disciples kicked out, but on all kids, and young believers and immature believers, and how do we react and bring them in and work together? And let's hear this message on our hearts. And say, God, break my heart if it's hard. Make it look more like Jesus's, who gave all of himself and gave on the way to do it. Let's pray. Dear God, we are not good at getting it right all the time. In fact, we are really good at getting it wrong. God, help us. Help us to live in ways that really honor you. Help us to live in ways that aren't filled with hard-heartedness and filled with looking for the opportunity to just break the relationship and to move on. God, help us to really not only hear the words of Jesus, but to see Jesus' life. And to see how he gave of himself, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Oh God, help us to try and love you the way you love us, and to share your message with everyone that we come in contact. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.